Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of crime dramas that I like. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Banshee. Now, something really hit me hard in this episode of Banshee. I felt like such an idiot for not realizing it. The reason why Carrie is so hell bent on taking down Proctor is it's not till Job said it. I was like, of course. It's because of Gordon. It was kind of brought up a little bit last episode. It's like, oh, what do you think your husband would think of you doing this? I was like, oh yeah, she's doing bad things. No, it's because she's trying to fulfill Gordon's wish. Because all Gordon's ever tried to do was take Proctor down. It was one thing he could never do. So she's essentially living out, trying to do one last thing for her husband. It's just like, how did I miss that? I was a complete and utter freaking idiot for not realizing it. It's like, it's so blatantly obvious. The moment that happened, that came up, I slapped my head. I was like, oh my god, like I was such an idiot for not figuring it out. Also, speaking of Job, finally, eventually, throughout the episode, he shaved his head, shaved a beard, kind of slightly becoming back to old Job. He is still a little unstable. I do love the fact that Carrie gave him chores around the house, and he's kind of like, I don't do windows. He's kind of like, bitch, did you just really give me chore to do? What the fuck is wrong with you? Kind of like that same mentality. We had a really nice scene between Sugar and Hood, which we really haven't really seen them communicate too much during this season. And it's just kind of like, he kind of brings up the fact is that Proctor burned down his house, which was crazy. I love that that was part of the opening. It's just like him burning your house down. Essentially, he's like, what did I tell you to stay away from Rebecca? I don't know if he knows about the pregnancy, though. I mean, he didn't really talk about it, so I don't know if he really knows. But he's like, yeah, essentially he knew the entire time that Hood was living there. He was fine with it because it's like, I thought, it meant that Hood would protect her. And he's like, I didn't know that meant you would sleep with her. He's like, go, if you're going to kill me, go ahead and kill me then. But essentially Proctor was like, no. He's like, the FBI is just going to lock this guy up, the one who killed her. I want you to find him and bring him to me. So it's like, okay, what kind of twisted torture does Proctor have in his mind for this guy? I mean, truth be told, is Hood. If Hood were to find him, I doubt Hood was going to turn him over to the cops anyway. I'm pretty sure Hood was going to put a bullet in him himself. And we also had an interesting conversation between well, because I like the fact is that Hood kind of came and visited Sugar because he's just kind of like, essentially he's kind of, he brings up the fact is he didn't really, he was like, oh yeah, you didn't kill Rebecca. He's like, you kind of thought it was. He's like, honestly, with a guy like you never know. Especially, now that he's been going like this year and a half. So he's like, okay, kind of had some drinks. He's like, do you have a place to stay? Where's he saying? Siobhan's trailer, which he can't even bring himself to go inside. And it's just like, it breaks, even those flashbacks break my heart. Every time I see Trista Kelly Dunn, the beautiful, wondrous, talented actress that played Siobhan, it's just every time I see that, it just breaks my heart. It's just like, he couldn't even bring himself to go inside, dude. It was just so heartbreaking. But I keep dodging around. I keep getting sidetracked in my brain. What I want to talk about is the fact is with that conversation between Job and Hood, they finally kind of had to sit down and talk. The fact is they've never really talked because, Hood's kind of avoided it. Sugar kind of talked him into like going to see and checking on Job, finding out for himself how Job's doing. Obviously he never outright says it, but, I'm pretty sure that Hood avoided that conversation because he was embarrassed, because he was ashamed, because he left, Job in that situation. He abandoned him, and he just like, Job's never going to forgive me for that. He's like, he was in that situation for 2 years, and he even openly admits it. He's like, I thought you were dead. He's like, I gave up on you. I gave up on everything, and, just kind of left. And then Job was kind of like, yeah, you were locked up for 15 years because of me. And he was like, no, that was Rabbit. And he's like, no, but that happened on my watch. Essentially, he's like, that's for both of their cases. He's like, that's time they can't never get back. His 15 years and his 2 years, the crap they went through, that shit's never coming back. That time they lost, never coming back. We have to live in the here and now. And it's kind of a beautiful thing. Like, Joe, probably a little upset, but still like to be able to forgive, finally forgive, could, because it did take him a long time to finally come again. It took him 2 years, but like he said, like that, it's lucky it was 2 years or not 15. So it's good to see that they are squared away and that they kind of don't hold any resentment towards each other. And speaking of Rabbit, it was very interesting. Carrie was in her, I guess, quote unquote therapy session, and she was talking to the guy because he kind of brought up Rabbit. He was like, "Oh, talk to her about your dad," and she talked about him. It was just like, she's like, had a very nice dream about him, and he was like, "You miss him, don't you?" And she's kind of, "Yeah, how fucked up is that? It is weird. Your dad was a legitimate monster, and you do on some level miss him. You know, it is kind of twisted." Some big things that, I almost like slipped and not talked about the real big thing that happened. The whole freaking situation with Watts and Calvin, essentially to make up for essentially the damage that Carrie caused last episode, burning that place down. Essentially, they needed someone to pay for it, and essentially they got the guy that ran the place. I guess he was one of the few, if not the only person to survive. He was one of the few people to survive. Essentially, he was the one that was in charge of the operation. Basically, Calvin was told what to do. Calvin got in the car, and I didn't know. I was like, okay, he's tied up to that tree. I was like, oh, don't tell me you're about to back up the car in front of him, onto him. No, worse. And then I looked at it, and he's like, when Watt said floorboard, I was like, no, you're not about to put it in drive, hit the gas, drove, lift his legs up, took 3 seconds, ripped his legs off. I was like, oh my God. That was freaking, this series is so bloody. It has like some of the most brutal deaths I have ever seen in it, like a TV show. Even in movies, it like hands down some of the most brutal deaths I've ever seen are in this TV show. And it's a little sick and a little twisted, but it's one of the reasons I love this show. Like, it always has like the most brutal deaths for people. And that was pretty brutal. I mean, it's one of that situation again where it's like Calvin, still being a punk, can't even like take down Watts. And even Watts, he was like, you're catering, like he's telling Watts, he's like, you're working for that Dutchie. He's like, honestly, it was between you and him. And he's like, don't think I didn't give it a second thought. And basically, that was going to be Calvin tied up to that tree. We even have Watts visiting Kurt. He's asking Kurt to come back, and Kurt's like, are you crazy? Like, I'm going to do everything I can in my power to take you down. And he's like, put you back in jail. And, it's just like, Watts, like, if I remember, was that Watts' hand or was that Kurt's? Because somebody's hand was kind of a little bruised up and they were kind of clenching their fists. It kind of seemed like he kind of had to hold himself back from trying to kill him. I mean, granted, he did try to kill him, try to snipe him. Granted, Brock showed up and stopped him. And then we have, at the very end of the episode, we ended up, Calvin finally did kill him. Granted, it was like, after like Maggie already went to Kurt, and, basically telling him that all this is, essentially Kurt's figuring out that this is all connected to the cartel. And essentially, he killed Watts. I was kind of expecting it. I expected him to do it at that, Aryan party of theirs, that little get together. I was expecting him to do it there, but I was like, ain't no way he's going to do it in front of all those people, because last thing he needs is all this trouble. I love the fact is he waited till it's like a one-on-one, took like an ice pick, back of the neck, killed him, and at the very end he strips down and starts cutting him up. It's just like, wow, because essentially, in his mind, Watts has kind of lost the beautiful image that the Brotherhood stood for, that now he's just trying to do things for money instead of doing, what's right for the Brotherhood, essentially. Some other things that went down this episode that I really liked is the fact is we also get Cruz, Deputy Cruz, stopping by. Did I mention it earlier? I don't remember if I did or not. If I did, cut this out. If I didn't, keep it in. I think I've done that before in another recording. But anyway, we got Cruz stopping by Carrie's place, just kind of scoping out the place, and then Job's there to meet her. Granted, he had his gun behind his back. I really like that. And it's just asking all these questions about why she's like kind of stalking around, why the fact is she parked her car so far away. It's like, oh yeah, we kind of had, some complaints from the neighbors. I was like, oh, you kind of got a phone call. It's like, oh yeah, it couldn't have been from us because I didn't call the police. And just like, oh, it must have been from your neighbors. Yeah, oh, sadly we don't have any of those neighbors. And it's like, oh, do you live here? He's like, oh no, I'm just stopping by for a little while. It's just like, she knows she's trailed because she was like already closing in last episode, even more so because she found out like some of the footprints were like a woman size 10 or something like that. So she tracked it back to Carrie. I don't think she knows that Carrie lives there, but she's definitely tracked it back to her. Because she is on Proctor's payroll, which I completely forgot about. The fact is, Job, that's something else too. Job actually told Hood about what she's up to. The fact is that she's taking down Proctor's business. Like, I did forget about that. He didn't confront her this episode, but I guess that's probably something we're going to see in the nearby future, if not in the next episode, sometime soon. But it's just like she walked away, but it's like I said, she's closing in, man. And we also had, I always keep forgetting, FBI agent Dawson. Every time, like, I don't even want to call her by her character name. I just want to be like Eliza Dushku. I always mess up her name. I hate it. It's like Dushku, and I don't know. I just always mess it up because for the longest time I've never known how to pronounce her name. It wasn't until recently, before like starting to do this for Banshee, I was like, oh yeah, let me find out how to properly pronounce her name. But essentially, we see her and Hood teaming up. It's like I still don't know what she wants with Hood. Like, she brought that thing up at the beginning of the episode. She's like trying to get to know him. She's essentially talking about some, essentially what's the shit going on with you. She even kind of starts breaking up Rebecca. It's like, if you want to talk about Rebecca, he's like, no, drop it. It's like, oh, like, you want to talk so much. Hood is essentially like, let's talk about your shit. She's like, ooh, we're not nearly drunk enough to talk about, the shit that's wrong with me. And once again, we see her getting high in this episode. It's like, I honestly don't know what's up with that lady. It's been kind of interesting to see that dynamic between her and Hood. Because she kind of seems like she's a lot like him. She's kind of like, does whatever it takes. Not really big on following the rules. Which, side note, that kind of got brought up early in the episode when Brock and Hood were talking. Because the fact is, he had snuck into Brock's car and he's like, I'm sorry for arresting you. He's like, if you're here to ask me to apologize for arresting you, I'm not going to. Hood's like, no, if I were in your shoes, I would have done the same thing. He's like, if you were in my shoes, you would have shot me. He's like, oh, maybe. I was just like, oh, good times between Brock and Hood. So good, so reminiscent. Anyway, but they showed up. Essentially, they ended up finding out that basically, because they ended up going to like a sex dungeon club or whatever, and they ended up kicking some ass. She was doing a little asking herself, but Hood luckily showed up in time to help kick some more ass. So they were getting a little drunk in her place because essentially she wants Hood to help her out with this whole case. It's just like I said, I don't know what she's getting out of this. I don't really know. Hopefully we get a little taste of her backstory, get to find out like why she's in this situation, why the hell she is like getting high, and why she's taking an interest in Hood so much. It's not just about solving this case. It's just like I don't know. I don't know what it is, and I can't even begin to wonder what it is. But another big thing that happened was Kai. He was essentially fed up with essentially his sister as well as the other congregation, of his people came and they freaking kept bothering him about Rebecca's body. He's like, no, you'll get Rebecca's body back soon enough. He's like, his sister's kind of like, you can do something about it. He's just telling them to go. And essentially they didn't listen. So what he did is essentially he kind of banished them from Banshee. He's like, you can't sell your vegetables or fruit or whatever here anymore. He's like, you won't be able to sell it anywhere. Essentially, we look off in the distance, and essentially their community is on fire. Because you see large fire in the distance, and it's like, wow. It's just, I guess I can only assume he was just super fed up because he's like, you're up here telling me to rush. He's like, essentially everything that happened was their fault. This all happened because they shunned Rebecca. So he's just like, at this point, he kind of has no empathy for it. Even his sister's running up saying, Kai, why? And it's just like, he doesn't say anything. Like, we saw Burton in the middle of the road with the saw. I was like, what is he about to do? I was like, he ain't about to cut anyone. And he starts walking towards. I was like, don't tell me you're about to kill the horse. It's like, no, he just cut the thing and let the horse run. I was like, oh, okay, that's good. I was about to flip out. I was about to be scared. But, man, things are just crazy. We even have that the serial killer, like he met with some random girl. Essentially, she's one of the followers that I guess that's there when him and his wife are kind of committing those rituals. And I don't know whether, like, because Brock called the killer out. So what I'm thinking is one of multiple things. Either he's going to use her as a next sacrifice or something like that, which I don't think that's the case. What I'm thinking is he's going to have her set herself up to be, she's going like, oh, I'm the real killer that you're looking for. And so she's going to turn herself in. That's what I'm thinking. I could be 100% wrong on that. But it just seems like, because she's willing to do anything for him. So I'm thinking like, okay, like, you know, he's like, I need you to do something for me, essentially. And he's holding and caressing her. I was like, I get the feeling he's going to make her like turn herself in just so that he can kind of go a little bit more under the radar, which doesn't matter, like I said, because Hood and Dawson are on his trail anyway. They're going to, there you got information about the doctor that basically performed the surgery on him to make him look the way he does. That, or she's just going to outright start killing people and get caught that way so that people stop looking in his direction. I don't know. But what I do know is, the fact is, now that Watts is dead, things are about to get even more complicated. Because essentially, Proctor was going to Watts to basically bring in a lot more product so they can give it to the cartel. But the cartel was basically like, if Proctor didn't come through, they're essentially saying there'll be hell to pay. I'm heavily paraphrasing. And it's going to be hell to pay because Calvin sure as hell isn't going to do what Proctor wants to anymore, because he's kind of broken free, which is me. It's going to be hella shit going down in Banshee, because I can only assume the cartel's not going to get the drugs they need, and they are going to lay waste to Banshee. They're going to cause an upheaval. There's going to be a lot of things going down. It's just, I can't wait. Freaking amazing episode. Loved every second of it. It was so good. Can't wait to see more. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.